The heat wasn't just in the air, it was a physical weight. It pressed down on the corrugated tin roof of the firing range shelter, radiated up from the cracked earth, and shimmered in a visible curtain over the 1,500 meters of graded sand and rock that served as their training ground. To the dozen men of SEAL Team 4's Delta Platoon, the oppressive Afghan sun was just another Tuesday. They thrived in it, their banter a low, gravelly counterpoint to the sharp crack of rifle fire. Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma stood apart, near the ammo crates, ostensibly observing. She was new to the platoon, a temporary attachment for their upcoming deployment deep into the Hindu Kush. Her file said she was a specialist in signals intelligence and unconventional warfare, but to the hard-faced men of Delta, she was an unknown quantity. Worse, she was an analyst who'd spent the last 2 years at a command center in Virginia Beach. They saw the trident on her uniform, but they didn't see a shooter. They saw a woman, quiet and compact, with dark, watchful eyes that seemed to absorb everything without comment. They saw a box that needed to be checked. "All right, Rico, you're up," Lieutenant Commander Thorne called out. His voice was as crisp and unforgiving as the landscape. Thorne was a man carved from granite and procedure, a product of the academy who believed discipline was measured in decibels and respect was a one-way street, down the chain of command. "Show the chief how we do business out here. Standard qualification, long range." Petty Officer First Class Mateo Rico Vargas grinned, a flash of white teeth in a sun-darkened face. He was Delta's golden boy, the platoon's designated marksman. He moved with a fluid arrogance, picking up the state-of-the-art MK-22 advanced sniper rifle as if it were an extension of his own arm. He winked at his buddies. "Don't blink, Chief. You might miss it." Sharma offered no reply. Her expression remained neutral, her posture relaxed but ready. She watched as Rico settled into his prone position, the rifle's bipod digging into the dusty ground. He cycled the bolt with practiced ease, the sound a slick, metallic shink-shink. Thorne stood over her, arms crossed. "Pay attention, Chief Sharma. This isn't a simulation on a screen. Out here, variables have consequences. Wind, heat, dust. They don't respond to algorithms." The dismissal was patent, a deliberate jab at her background. She knew what he thought of her assignment to his team. He saw her as a liability, a political appointee forced on him by a command eager to showcase diversity. He didn't believe she belonged. Her silence seemed only to confirm his prejudice. She didn't rise to the bait, didn't defend her record or her right to be there. She simply watched the heat mirage dance over the distant targets. The range was a brutal test. Steel silhouettes were placed at staggered intervals from 600 to 1,500 meters. Some were static, others were on moving tracks, and a few were peekaboo targets, designed to appear from behind cover for only a few seconds. The wind was a fickle beast, gusting unpredictably from the mountain passes, swirling dust devils across the range. It was a shooter's nightmare. For Rico, it was a stage. He took his first shot at the 600-meter plate. The rifle's report was a deafening crack, followed by nothing. No satisfying ping of bullet hitting steel. A cloud of dust kicked up a full meter to the left of the target. Rico cursed under his breath, his confidence momentarily shaken. "Settle down, Rico," Thorne barked. "Read the wind." Rico adjusted his scope, muttering about a sudden gust. He fired again. Another miss, this time high and right. The easy camaraderie of the platoon evaporated, replaced by a tense silence. Rico was the best they had. If he was struggling, the conditions were worse than they appeared. He fired a third, a fourth, a fifth time, his movements growing more frantic. None of them connected. The steel plates remained untouched, mocking him from across the shimmering heat. "Something's wrong with this rifle," he finally spat, pushing himself up from the ground in disgust. He slammed the magazine out onto the shooting mat. "The scope's off. It's gotta be." Thorne's face was a thundercloud. He gestured to the platoon's armorer, a seasoned chief named Gunner. "Check it." Gunner, a man whose hands moved with the quiet reverence of a surgeon, took the rifle. He laid it carefully on a portable vise and used a bore sighter and a set of calipers. The men gathered around, their earlier arrogance replaced by concern. A compromised weapon before a critical mission was a serious problem. After several minutes of meticulous examination, Gunner straightened up, his expression grim. "There's a hairline fracture in the Picatinny rail, right under the forward scope mount," he announced. "Must have taken a hard knock during the last insertion. Every shot is torquing the mount just a few microns, but at this range, it's throwing the rounds off unpredictably. The Zero is shot. Sir, this weapon is non-mission capable." The words hung in the oppressive heat. Their most advanced precision rifle was, for all intents and purposes, broken. Thorne's jaw tightened. He looked from the useless rifle to Rico's frustrated face, then at the rest of his platoon. It was a bad omen. A failure of equipment, a failure of their best shooter. His gaze swept past them and landed, almost dismissively, on Sharma. She hadn't moved. Her dark eyes were fixed on the damaged rifle, her expression unreadable. He was about to call off the drill, to launch into a tirade about proper weapon maintenance, when her voice cut through the tension. It was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of arrogance. "Let me try that." Every head turned. The statement was so simple, so direct, it was jarring. Rico let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Try what, Chief? It's broken. The scope's useless." Thorne stared at her, his eyes narrowing. He saw a data analyst, someone who spent her days staring at satellite imagery and intercept reports. He saw a woman who, in his mind, had no place on a SEAL team's firing line. He was about to shut her down with a curt negative, but he stopped. There was something in her stance, in the unwavering calm of her gaze, that gave him pause. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement of fact. He looked at the useless rifle, at the dejected faces of his men. A part of him, the cruel, disciplinarian part, decided to let her try. Let her fail. It would be a lesson in humility. "The weapon is compromised, Chief," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's not a video game where you can just reset the parameters." "I'm aware, Lieutenant Commander," she replied, her tone even. She walked forward, her movements economical and precise. She didn't look at the men, only at the rifle resting in the vise. "But broken doesn't always mean useless." Thorne grunted. "Fine. The range is yours. Don't waste my time." Sharma gently lifted the heavy rifle from the cradle. She didn't immediately drop to the ground. Instead, she stood with it, feeling its weight and balance. Her hands moved over the stock, the receiver, the damaged rail mount. She wasn't just holding a tool. She was diagnosing it, learning its new, flawed personality. The men watched, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity on their faces. They were waiting for the inevitable failure, the complete humiliation. She retrieved a single magazine, loaded it with 5 rounds, and clicked it into place. Then, she lay down on the dusty mat Rico had just vacated, her body sinking into a stable, practiced-prone position. She didn't press her eye immediately to the scope. Instead, she stared downrange, watching the wind. She wasn't just looking at the flags or the dust. She was observing the subtlest of tells, the way the long blades of grass bent in the middle distance, the speed of the mirage shimmering upwards, the almost imperceptible drift of a hawk circling high above. For a full minute, she did nothing but breathe and watch, her mind a silent whirlwind of calculation. Finally, she settled behind the rifle. She pulled the stock into the pocket of her shoulder, her cheek finding its natural resting place. She exhaled slowly, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. The first target was the 600-meter steel plate Rico had repeatedly missed. It was a large, forgiving target, a warm-up. Inside the scope, the reticle's crosshairs were clear, but she knew they were lying. They were no longer a point of aim, but an arbitrary reference in a broken system. Crack. The shot broke the silence. The recoil pushed firmly into her shoulder. Everyone watched the target. A puff of dust erupted, low and left, even further off than Rico's first shot. A few of the men snickered. Rico shook his head, a smug, "I told you so" look on his face. Thorne's expression hardened. He had been right. A waste of time and ammunition. Sharma ignored them. She cycled the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent casing. She hadn't been aiming for a hit. She had been gathering data. The impact in the dirt was her first data point. She knew where the rifle was supposed to be aiming, and she now knew where the bullet actually went. The deviation was her new truth. She adjusted her position slightly. She didn't touch the scope's dials. The problem wasn't the scope settings. It was the physical mount. Adjusting the dials was pointless. Instead, she adjusted herself. She brought her eye back to the scope, but this time, she didn't place the central crosshair on the target. She mentally offset it, aiming at a piece of empty air high and to the right, using a specific mil dot on the reticle as her new, improvised aiming point. It was a feat of complex mental geometry, calculating windage, elevation, and the rifle's specific mechanical flaw all at once. She controlled her breathing, waiting for the lull between heartbeats. Crack. The sound of the shot was followed, a second later, by a clear, high-pitched ping that echoed back across the range. Dead center. The snickering died instantly. The men straightened up. Rico's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Thorne's arms, which had been crossed in judgment, slowly uncrossed. Sharma's face showed no emotion, no triumph, no relief. She simply cycled the bolt, her movements as fluid and economical as before. She had confirmed her data. Now she would execute. She shifted her aim to the next target, an 800-meter plate. The wind had picked up, now gusting from left to right. She held for a moment, then fired. Crack. Ping. Another perfect hit. Crack. Ping. A 900-meter target. Crack. Ping. Another at 950. She fired the fifth and final round from the magazine at a 1,000-meter target. The delay between the shot and the impact was longer now, nearly 2 seconds of suspended tension. The faint ping that returned was the only sound in a world that had gone completely silent, save for the whisper of the wind. 5 shots, for hits. The first was a calibration. The rest were a statement. She reached for another magazine without being asked. One of the younger SEALs, a man named Jax, silently slid a full one across the mat to her. His movements were deferential. The next set of targets were movers. A steel silhouette on a track, moving at a walking pace at 700 meters. This was a new level of complexity. She had to lead the target, factoring in its speed, the bullet's flight time, the wind, and the rifle's mechanical offset. It was a 4-dimensional physics problem. She settled in, her breathing slow and rhythmic. She tracked the target smoothly, the compromised reticle held out in front of it in a patch of empty brown landscape. She wasn't aiming at the target. She was aiming where the target would be when her bullet, flying from its flawed trajectory, finally arrived. Crack. The bullet struck the moving plate squarely in the chest. Ping. She did it again, and again. 5 moving targets, 5 consecutive hits. The platoon was no longer just watching. They were studying her. They watched the minute adjustments of her shoulders, the steady pressure of her cheek against the stock, the absolute stillness of her body before each shot. They were witnessing a level of marksmanship that bordered on the supernatural. This wasn't just skill. It was an intimate, almost telepathic, connection between shooter, weapon, and environment. Now only the hardest targets remained. The impossible ones. A head and shoulders silhouette that would pop up from behind a barrier at 1,200 meters for exactly 3 seconds. The distance was extreme, the exposure time minimal. The wind was now a swirling vortex, making any shot a gamble. Thorne stepped forward. "That's enough, Chief. You've made your point." He meant it as an order, but his tone lacked its earlier authority. It was closer to a suggestion, a way to let her quit while she was ahead, to preserve this incredible display before she attempted the impossible and failed. Sharma didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed downrange, watching the barrier. 30 targets on the course, Lieutenant Commander. she said. Her voice still quiet but now edged with a cold, hard resolve. I've hit 15. She chambered a new round. The air crackled with anticipation. Everyone held their breath. They watched the barrier. Nothing. 1 second. 2. Then, with a pneumatic hiss, the target appeared. Crack. Sharma fired almost instantaneously. It seemed impossible she could have acquired the target, calculated the hold, and squeezed the trigger in that fraction of a second. The target was still exposed when the sound of the impact, a faint but distinct plink, came echoing back. It dropped back behind the barrier a moment later. A hit. Rico let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. No way, he whispered, not to anyone in particular. No damn way. She repeated the feat 4 more times. Each time the target appeared, she fired with preternatural speed and precision. 5 pop-up targets at 1,200 meters, 5 perfect hits. The pile of spent brass casings next to her grew into a small, gleaming hill. Finally, there were only the last 10 targets left. They were small, 12-inch circular plates, placed at the very edge of the range, from 1,300 to 1,500 meters. At that distance, the plates were barely visible to the naked eye, appearing as tiny specks through the powerful scope. The bullet's flight time would be over 3 seconds. A slight miscalculation in wind speed, a change in air density, the spin of the Earth itself, the Coriolis effect, all of it could mean a miss of several feet. And she was doing it with a broken rifle. She began the final sequence. Her process was even more deliberate now. She spent longer between shots, her eyes scanning the entire length of the range, reading the full story of the wind. The heat mirage was her enemy, distorting the image of the target, making it dance and waver. She had to shoot through the distortion, trusting her cold, hard calculations over what her eyes were telling her. Crack. A long, tense pause. Ping. 1,300 meters. Crack. An even longer pause. Ping. 1,350 meters. Crack. The world holding its breath. Ping. 1,400 meters. Each shot was a masterpiece of ballistic science and sheer intuition. She wasn't just a shooter. She was a physicist, an artist, a force of nature. The men of Delta Platoon, operators who had seen combat in the worst places on Earth, stood in silent, reverent awe. They had never seen anything like it. The arrogance had been burned out of them, replaced by a profound and humbling respect. 9 more targets fell, one after another, each punctuated by the distant, victorious ring of steel. Only one remained, the 1,500-meter plate, the final test. Sharma paused. She closed her eyes for a moment, clearing her mind. She opened them and they were like chips of obsidian. She settled behind the rifle for the 30th time. The wind was gusting hard now, a physical force she could feel pushing against her. She had to time the shot perfectly, releasing it in the brief, fractional second lull between 2 powerful gusts. She took a slow breath in and let half of it out. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The world narrowed to the shimmering image in her scope, the improvised aiming point hovering in space, and the feel of the trigger just before the break. She waited. The gust hit, shaking the spotting scope on its tripod. Then, for a heartbeat, the air grew still. Crack. The final shot. The rifle bucked against her shoulder one last time. The small brass casing spun through the air, landing silently in the dust. 3.5 seconds of agonizing silence followed. The entire platoon leaned forward, their eyes straining to see the tiny, distant speck. Ping. The sound was faint, almost swallowed by the vastness of the landscape. But it was there, unmistakable, perfect. 30 for 30. With a broken rifle. Anya Sharma laid the rifle gently down on the mat. She pushed herself up, her movements unhurried. She didn't smile. She didn't look at the men. She simply walked back toward the ammo crates, the task completed. The silence on the range was absolute. It was a silence born of shock and awe. Rico stared at the pile of 30 gleaming shell casings, then at Sharma's back. He looked down at his own hands, hands he had always considered the steadiest in the platoon, and felt a sense of profound inadequacy. Just then, a dust-covered Humvee rumbled to a stop behind the shelter. The door opened and a man stepped out who commanded instant respect. He was a command master chief from the main base, a legend within the SEAL community named Mac Grizz Miller. He had a face like a roadmap of every conflict since the 90s and a presence that made even Thorne stand a little straighter. Grizz ambled over, his eyes taking in the scene. The silent platoon, Thorne's stunned expression, and Sharma standing calmly by the water cooler. He saw the Mk-22 on the mat and the distant, freshly pinged targets. A slow grin spread across his weathered face. He walked straight past Thorne and stopped in front of Sharma. "Heard there was some trouble with the Mk-22's rail," he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked her up and down. "Figured if anyone could shoot a broken gun straight, it'd be you. Still haven't lost the touch, Kestrel." The name hung in the air. Kestrel. It wasn't a name from an analyst's file. It was a call sign. Predator's name. Thorne and Rico exchanged a confused look. "Kestrel?" Thorne asked, his voice hesitant. Grizz chuckled, turning to the bewildered lieutenant commander. "Before Chief Sharma was crunching signals data for you boys, she was an operator with the development group. Her specialty wasn't just shooting. It was improvisation. High-angle, unconventional marksmanship. We used to drop her into mountains with nothing but a rifle and a radio. Her unit wrote the damn doctrine on degraded equipment employment. Making a broken rifle work isn't a party trick for her, Lieutenant. It was her job." The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. Development Group, DevGru. The most elite, secretive unit in the special operations world. She wasn't just a SEAL. She was from the very pinnacle of the community. The analyst role, the quiet demeanor, it was all a cover, or perhaps a much-needed respite from a career spent in the sharpest end of the spear. They hadn't been watching a desk jockey. They had been watching a master at work. Thorne stared at Sharma, his face a complex mask of shock, embarrassment, and dawning respect. He saw her now not as a subordinate to be managed, but as a warrior whose skills far surpassed his own. He opened his mouth to say something, an apology, an explanation, but no words came. Instead, he gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of concession, an admission of his own profound misjudgment. It was the highest compliment he was capable of giving. Rico walked over to the shooting mat. He bent down and picked up one of the warm, spent shell casings. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, feeling its precise, machined edges. He then walked to the cooler, grabbed a bottle of ice-cold water, and walked over to Sharma. He didn't say a word. He just held it out to her. When she took it, their eyes met for a brief second. In his, there was no longer any mockery, only a deep, unwavering respect. He then went back to his gear and began to clean his own weapon, his movements now quiet, methodical, and stripped of all their earlier bravado. The rest of the platoon followed his lead. The atmosphere on the range transformed from a competitive arena to a place of quiet, professional focus. Later that evening, long after the sun had bled out behind the jagged peaks, the range was deserted. A single, bare bulb cast a lonely circle of light over a cleaning bench. Anya Sharma stood there, alone. In the cradle in front of her was not her own issued rifle, but the broken Mk-22. She worked in silence, her hands moving with an ingrained, loving precision. She used a soft cloth to wipe the fine dust from the stock, a carbon rod to clean the barrel, a small brush to clear the residue from the bolt carrier group. She treated the damaged weapon not as a flawed tool, but as a trusted partner. It had a flaw, a wound, just as every soldier did. But she had understood its wound, and together, they had performed flawlessly. The metallic scent of solvent and gun oil filled the still night air. She carefully reassembled the rifle, the clicks of the parts locking into place the only sound. She ran a hand over the cracked rail, her fingers tracing the source of the imperfection that had so thoroughly humbled the best men of Delta Platoon. When she was finished, the rifle looked pristine, its brokenness hidden beneath a veneer of meticulous care. She placed it gently back in its hard case, securing the latches with a final, soft snap. She stood for a moment, her work done. She looked out across the dark, empty range, where the 30 steel targets stood like silent, metal ghosts under the starlight. They were witnesses to what had happened there. She took a deep breath of the cool night air, the day's oppressive heat finally broken. Then, she switched off the light, plunging the bench into darkness, and walked away, leaving only the silence and the newly earned respect to fill the void.